Before we start with our digital painting, and today's tutorial is going to be on digital illustration, first towards digital painting that will be more aligned to flat vector-based painting. So again, I'm going to start off with my character, my portrait in this instance, starting with the nose, developing and building up the eyes. I'm thinking around the processes of how big I want the eyebrows to be, looking at big open areas for vector-based painting to work, especially in terms of how I want the features to be with regards to the lips, the edges of the face towards the chin, nice and pointed. And then I think I'm going to add a hat for this character as well. So I'm building up the rim of the hat, I'm building up the ears, maybe little earrings at the bottom, and then the top part of the hat in loose, very rough lines. I'm not going to develop too much concentration on the collar, but I'm now going to work on refining my lines. So I've started to refine the lines a little bit more of the initial line work that I have developed, and after the first set of refined line work, I'm now really tweaking the finalized lines that I want to have for the end outline of my illustration. So I'm developing thicker outlines for the main features, especially in terms of the most prominent features, which in this case will be the nose, eyes, eyebrows, mouth, the edges of the face, towards the ears, hat, and then the collar area. So I'm working on just the outlines at this instance, pure black line, and I'm thinking of adding a little mustache, partial mustache on the top lip, starting to develop the edges of the jawline. So I'm going to build up both ears, fine lines on the inside with thick lines on the edges. From there, I'm going to develop the top part of the head, which in this case will be the rim for the hat. So I'm developing the first initial part of the rim closest to the head, developing the front part of the cap, the inside angle lines, moving closer towards the turning points, and then developing the top part of the hat. So what I'm also going to do with regards to now moving forward in terms of building up my colors, I'm going to select a few colors for the hat, for the face, and I'm going to do it in a set tone layout. What that means is I'm going to start off with indicating for myself what I want the midtone to be, filling up the face with regards to the midtone, which I'm then going to move towards the low light, then highlight and shadow. And I'm filling up the bigger parts here, which is going to be basically just the black areas on the face that I will then later start to refine. So I'm building up just the black inside parts for the eyes, the eyebrows and mustache, and little partial beard at the bottom. Now I'm going to also select my colors that I'm going to utilize for the hat as well, which I will build up in renditions and in variations of blue. So I'm just going to define and build up my black areas first, and my approach with the vector-based drawing and illustration painting is not necessarily just a colorful process, but it's more exciting and more enjoyable to actually build up your vector-based illustration, be it whatever it is you want to actually paint, and actually paint it on. Actually utilize your vector line work in terms of filling up and building up your contour and volumes instead of just cropping up sections and then filling up your line work. So I've got some estimates of where I want to place basic contour lines in the beginning, but what we will do when I start to build up my colors is I have to think of where my light source comes from, and I have to think of what will be the adjacent color or the next color, which is in relation to my midtone. I'm going to go slightly darker, and then right at the end I will build up my highlights at the end to really make the illustration stand out in terms of what the actual midtones are. So you can have any color range you want. I've just chosen a more natural, familiar color range that I'm going to work with this face, but you can use any monochromatic coloring. You can choose blues and purples and analogous colors together with one another. You can have different renditions of vibrant, luminous colors, but you can see at the top I've got my swatches that are just basically little circles of the colors that I want to use selected. And looking at my final line work over here, I'm now going to start to select my initial coloring and then start filling up just the first basic areas like I've done with the face. And then what I'll do is I will start to build up the adjacent colors, which is then again, as I've mentioned, the lowlights and then the shadow parts moving towards the highlights. Now I've selected the colors at the top in a completely different layer. That layer I keep separate to just either switch on or off and reselect it if I want to go back and visit certain colors. Then you don't need to worry about your color swatch diagram or that wheel or different swatches, but it's basically just select, click and hold on that particular color that you want to choose and work with, and then fill the relevant area and then work on your next color. So starting to fill the hat in the blue color and looking at the next darker color that I have, I'm basically building up where I want my lowlights to be, and then from the lowlights I'm then building up the bottom part of the hat, again with the top part of the hat building up on the side where I want the contour lines to be. And you need to play around with how you want the shapes to be for vector painting. You can have sharp, very rigid line work. You can have more soft, organic line work. But for this purpose, I'm going to use more rigid, more stark lines in relation to my vector illustration. So next to the mid-tone, I had my low light, and then as you can see, I'm building up my darker tone for the hat. So I'm building up that darker blue to show where the shadow parts are. I'm also then thinking of where I want to place it at the bottom cap, and which is closer to the head area. I then also look at how I want to fade it up to the top part of the rim of the hat. I'm not going to completely fill the whole bottom part. I'm going to leave some areas open to show that there is some light coming in at the darkest part of the hat, which in this case is closer to the face. So I'm playing around with regards to opacity in some areas, doing an overlay, but in most instances I'm using a full 100% opacity for all my colors that I've chosen. So now I'm going to build up on the face the next tonal value, which is in relation to the midtone, which is going to be now the low light. I'm basically painting in my tonal value of where I want over a big area the low light to be. Don't freak out in the beginning when you actually build up bigger parts. You will experiment and see where you want your light source to come from. My light source is going to come from more on the left hand side and slightly from the right, but I've got a different light source at the top where you can see the light on the hat is more strained on the right hand side. But for the contours of the face, remember we are building up vector flat illustration paintings here. So you're not going to necessarily worry too much about the actual blend of the colors, but rather the layering of colors. So I'm building up my midtone in relation to my low light and seeing from that midtone and low light what areas are going to necessarily be slightly darker than the others. That will give me an indication of where to apply my additional darker colors, which you can see I'm placing in relation to the pocket of the eye, moving towards the edge of the nose, over the bridge of that nose, and looking at the ball of the nose to the edge, around the mouth, and I'm going to build up sections, as you can see, that are very sharp for this type of illustration, which is cool to use. It's no worry, you can play around with the shapes, but looking at the contour again of the face to know where I want to build my lights and dark colors throughout. So I'm testing the playground and saying, don't like this area, so I'm just going to raise this part of the cheek a little bit more so it's a little bit more rounded for the top part of the cheekbones closer to the eyes. And from there I'm going to select another darker color in this instance now, moving more towards the shadowy parts for the very dark areas just beneath the bottom lid of the eye, towards the top lid, pocket of the eye. And I'm going to build up areas along the nose as well, to the bridge, and especially on the forehead, which is closest to the cap. So you can see I'm going to fill up this big area over here. So I'm filling up this whole area in a dark purplish color, and this color I've selected because I thought it's going to work quite well in relation to my midtones. And looking at the color hues that I'm working with, you'll see that I'm going to use slightly warmer colors when I get to the lips. But now I'm still just building up the darker tones to indicate where the shadow areas are, the very dark areas of the face. But again, you can see I'm not filling it up completely black or completely opaque, so we can still see the bottom layer of our facial features. So again, building up some darker tones at the nose towards the mouth, moving down towards that chin, because always there's a darker line from the bottom lip towards the chin. And from this point, moving on to the ears, make a little bit dark on the top parts, then moving into the inside of the ears, very quick, very loose lines. And I'm not going to blend any of these lines out. I'm using the lines as refined and as sharp as what they are. I'm basically just going to layer additional coloring. So you can see with the lips, I'm building up a slightly warmer color for the top and bottom lid. And then I'm also going to include some shadowy parts on the lips. So for the top one, I'm going to use slightly more cooler colors, and then for the bottom, I'm going to use slightly warmer colors and an even warmer, darker tone for the shadowy parts. But also from this point, as I move with regards to the tonal values darker, I'm going to move lighter, and you'll see that I'm going to use a lighter pink now for the bottom lip, and I'm going to then go darker, very dark for the top part of the forehead, very close aligned to the cap, just to show that it's really dark and that the cap is actually stuck on to the head itself. Now moving to the last point, which is the very white areas, or your utmost highlights that you want to apply on your face or on your illustration or on your object that you are drawing. In this instance, I'm thinking of to what extent I want to apply the highlights coming in, and you will see that what I'm going to do is I'm applying a highlight which is very light in relation to my midtones and dark tones, but I'm going to go even lighter when I apply my final overarching highlight, which is an overlay of highlight in pure white. This color that I've chosen is literally selecting the midtone and moving that color swatch to the lighter part to select a lighter tone. I'm applying the lighter colors on the cheeks on the sides, on the turning points on the nose, and you can see that on any face, on any object that you draw, the higher points of that object or on the face will have definite highlights. And in this case, it's the turning points on the nose, it's the eyelids itself, and it's the cheekbones and edges of the face, as well as the edges of the ears, as well as the top lip and bottom lip. So I'm starting to refine where I want the highlights to be applied throughout the face, and I'm now applying the very most vivid highlights on the nose, edges of the hat, a lighter blue, and I'm then going to start to think of refining my dark lines and my line work on the moustache, eyelashes, and brows itself, without definitely going into highlights with regards to tonal value. In this instance, I'm basically focusing now on just refining my dark lines for now. And as I'm defining these lines and I'm building it up from a whole perspective, our line work starts from basic midtone, fill your object, in this instance the hat as well as the face. Then next midtone, you have your low light, build up very sharp, very stark lines for your actual low lights, and then you build up your shadows, and right at the end refine for highlights. And that is a basic understanding and principle of using flat vector painting.